In 1980, Caddyshack showed up like a weird little explosion in American movies, a chaotic, cocky golf comedy that looked almost nothing like anything else on screen at the time. Bushwood did not just give audiences laughs, it created a whole atmosphere people still recognize right away, even now. But what really makes me want to look back at this movie is not just the lines or those crazy characters. It is the fact that after 46 years, the real lives of the cast ended up going in directions even harder to predict than the movie itself. Some people walked straight into the spotlight and left behind plenty of controversy. Some became icons with only a few scenes, and that was enough to make them unforgettable. Some left Hollywood way too early and left behind a sense of regret that lasted a long time. And some faces quietly stayed in it for the long run, in ways hardly anybody saw coming. Today, let us take a look back at the cast of Caddyshack back then, and see how time changed them after nearly half a century. Number 1. Chevy Chase, Webb. If you open this list without putting him first to me, that is almost like skipping the strongest screen presence in Caddyshack altogether. In the movie, Chevy Chase plays Webb, a rich golfer who is calm, easygoing, and always carrying that dry, hard-to-mistake kind of sarcasm. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, he was about 36 years old. Now he is 82. And the thing is, Chase did not walk into this movie as some newcomer testing his luck. He came in as a star rising fast after Saturday Night Live, right when Hollywood was starting to see him as a major comedy heavyweight.
Stop thinking, let things happen, and be the ball. Any?
After the movie, Chevy Chase really did step into the brightest stretch of his glory years. He followed it up with the National Lampoon's Vacation series, then Fletch Spies Like Us, and more enough to become one of the most recognizable comedy faces in American film in the 1980s. But Chevy Chase's story was never just about the spotlight. In 1986, he entered rehab because of a dependence on painkillers. Later on, issues involving cocaine and alcohol kept wearing down his image. By the time Community came around, he had a pretty notable return on television, but that stretch also brought behind-the-scenes clashes, controversy over racially offensive remarks, and a very noisy split from the show. I have always felt Chevy Chase is the kind of star where the bigger the fame gets, the harder it becomes to hide the rough edges of who he is. After a serious heart failure episode in 2021, he fell into a coma and had some pretty clear memory problems afterward. And maybe that is exactly why Chevy Chase is the right person to open today's list, the most famous, the most conflicted, and also the one who leaves behind the most mixed feelings. But now let us step away from that sharp-edged energy for a bit, because the next person brings Caddyshack into a softer, sweeter way, more nostalgic kind of light, Cindy Morgan. Number 2. Cindy Morgan, Lacey, Underall. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Cindy Morgan was about 25. If she had lived to 2026, she would be 71. Sadly, she passed away at the end of 2023 at age 69. What always sticks with me about Cindy Morgan is that she did not come into this movie as a major star. She came from very everyday jobs, like weather reporting radio and commercials. Caddyshack was really her first big break in film. After the movie, Cindy Morgan had another very important milestone with Tron in 1982, where she played both Laura Baines and Yori. That was the role that helped her name stay alive in people's memories, right alongside Caddyshack. She kept working steadily for years after that, appearing in series like Falcon Crest Chip's Matlock and The Larry Sanders Show. But if you really look closely, you can see this was also a somewhat quiet journey. Cindy Morgan was always recognizable and well-liked, but Hollywood never really gave her the kind of big place her looks and screen presence seemed to promise. The more you think about it, the more it feels like a shame, especially when she herself said that after Caddyshack producer John Peters pressured her to pose for Playboy, and she turned him down. In the last years of her life, Cindy Morgan was still appreciated by fans because of Caddyshack and Tron, and she still showed up at reunions and nostalgia events. Leave a few words in the comments to remember and honor her if she was part of your memories too, before we move on to the third name. Number 3. Bill Murray, Carl Spackler. Some actors do not need to stand at the center of the story, but in the end, they are the ones who stay in the audience's memory the longest. In Caddyshack, Bill Murray is exactly that kind of case. He played Carl Spackler, the weird groundskeeper who talks like he is having a conversation with the messy thoughts inside his own head. When the movie came out in 1980, Bill Murray was about 29. Right now, he is 75, and he will turn 76 this coming September. Back then, Murray was rising fast out of Saturday Night Live, still carrying that wild edge of a comedian, just breaking out of television, not yet the seasoned film icon we now just call Bill Murray. The truth is, Carl Spackler was originally only a small part, and Murray was brought in for a short stretch, but his improvisation was so strong, the team basically had to make more room for the character. And after Caddyshack, he went straight down a road not many people can pull off, winning over mainstream audiences with Stripes' Ghostbusters and Groundhog Day, while also moving into a quieter, more refined style with Rushmore and Lost in Translation. In 2016, he received the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, which felt like the official version of something audiences had known for years, that Bill Murray does not just make people laugh, he has his own whole presence. Of course, that journey was not completely spotless. The Being Mortal situation in 2022, with a complaint about inappropriate behavior and a $100,000 settlement, left a pretty visible scratch on his image, and as late as 2025, Murray was still talking about it publicly. Even so, he kept working, and he still had new movies like The Friend released in 2025. And if Bill Murray is the face that proves a few scenes can be enough to become immortal, the next name brings a totally different feeling. Someone who lit up early and then left the screen far too fast. Sarah Holcomb. Number 4. Sarah Holcomb, Maggie O'Hooligan. Some faces barely have time to settle into the audience's memory before the screen closes on them almost immediately. Sarah Holcomb is one of those cases. In Caddyshack, she played Maggie O'Hooligan, Danny Nunan's girlfriend. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Sarah Holcomb was 21. Right now, she is 67, and she will turn 68 in September. What felt sad to me right from the start is that she was still such a young actress then, and she had just been noticed by audiences in Animal House, so anybody could have thought she had a long road ahead of her. But Sarah Holcomb's career ended up going in a much shorter direction than people expected. Her public acting stretch really only lasted from 1978 to 1980. Before Caddyshack, she appeared in Animal House, she was cast in Jaws 2, and then cut when the project changed its script, and after that, she pretty much left Hollywood for good. And you know, what is even sadder, Sarah Holcomb struggled with mental illness and substance abuse, spent time in inpatient treatment, then gradually got more stable and stayed away from the public eye. And maybe that is exactly why Sarah Holcomb stays in people's memory so long. Not because she had a long career, but because she leaves behind the feeling of a door that had barely opened before it shut. She is still alive, but she has been away from the spotlight for a very long time. Number 5. Michael O'Keefe. Danny Nunan. Michael O'Keefe played Danny Nunan, the young caddy trying to squeeze his way into a world much fancier than the one he came from. Caddyshack came out in 1980, and Michael O'Keefe was only 25 then. By 2026, he is 71. What a lot of people forget is that when he came into this movie, O'Keefe was not unknown at all. Just 1 year earlier, he had already been nominated for an Oscar for playing Ben Meacham in The Great Santini. In other words, Hollywood once seemed to be predicting that he was a rising face who could break out and go very far. But Michael O'Keefe's road did not go in that loud breakout direction. After Caddyshack, he did not become a box office superstar, and he did not dive into a series of scandals just to keep his name in the headlines. He chose a steadier and quieter kind of career. O'Keefe kept making films working on stage and gradually became a very solid television actor with roles in Roseanne, then Homeland and Sneaky Pete. His personal life had a few details people remember too, like his marriage to Bonnie Raitt from 1991 to 1999. But what makes him feel so different from a lot of people on this list to me comes from somewhere else entirely. Number 6. Rodney Dangerfield, Al Czervik. Rodney Dangerfield walked into Caddyshack like a man who had no intention of asking anybody for permission. As Al Czervik, he brought exactly the loud, flashy, reckless energy that suddenly made all of Bushwood feel too small. When the movie came out in 1980, Rodney Dangerfield was about 58. If he had lived to 2026, he would be 104. But the saddest part is that he never got that chance. He passed away in 2004 at age 82.
I tell you, country clubs and cemeteries, biggest wastes of prime real estate.
Unlike some of the other actors, Rodney did not do Caddyshack to find an opportunity. At that point, he was already a comedian with a very clear brand, with his self-mocking style, and the catchphrase, "I do not get no respect," almost fully turned into a personal trademark. After Caddyshack, Rodney did not need to prove he could be funny anymore. What he proved was that his stage rhythm could absolutely spill into movies and still keep all its impact. He went on with Easy Money, then Back to School movies that helped Rodney Dangerfield's image stick hard in the memory of American comedy in the 1980s. It gets even more interesting when you look back at the long road he took. Before he really made it, Rodney struggled for a long time, stepped away from comedy to work other jobs, then came back and built an entire public persona out of the feeling of not getting any respect. In other words, this was a man who reached the top pretty late, but once he got there, he made everybody else move over. Around that same period, the album No Respect also won him a Grammy in 1981, which felt like a really nice confirmation that Rodney was not just some short-lived stage phenomenon. Rodney's final years were not easy. He had a mild stroke in 2001, brain surgery in 2003, then died from complications after heart valve replacement surgery in 2004. But honestly, when I think of Rodney Dangerfield, I do not remember him as a story of failing health. I remember him as the kind of performer who could change the whole air in the room the second he opened his mouth. Al Czervik is still one of the liveliest parts of Caddyshack, and very few people can do that. My hat is off to him. Number 7. Scott Colomby, Tony D'Annunzio. As Tony D'Annunzio, Scott Colomby brought this slick, confident, slightly impulsive energy to the movie, and it fit perfectly with the young caddies, always trying to act like they were one step smarter than everybody else. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Scott Colomby was about 27. By 2026, he is 73, and he will turn 74 this coming September. Scott Colomby got into the business very early. He was on Days of Our Lives when he was just 13, then moved through all kinds of series before ending up at Bushwood. That is why Tony D'Annunzio has that very camera-ready quality, like he knows exactly what he is doing. After Caddyshack, Scott Colomby kept going pretty clearly in the early 1980s youth movie lane with Porky's and the two follow-ups. But what made him different from a lot of people from that era is that he did not keep trying to hold on to that movie image forever. From the 1990s on, Colomby's career rhythm got quieter and leaned much more toward theater music and performance art. The Los Angeles Times once wrote that he was the one organizing classical readings at Highland Grounds, a Shakespeare and classical theater performance series with a very distinct flavor. A few years later, that paper mentioned Big Elvin and the Professor's Blues Theater. A group Colomby and Louis Lista put together that mixed blues, comedy, street theater, and performance art in a very loose, spontaneous way. Now Scott Colomby lives pretty privately and rarely makes public appearances. Even so, in 2025, he was still spotted in Los Angeles during one rare outing, enough to remind people he has not disappeared at all. He has just chosen a different pace from the bright lights and cameras of earlier years. And honestly, just knowing he is living happily is enough for me. That is the best news of all. Number 8. Ted Knight, Judge Elihu Smails. Ted Knight played Judge Elihu Smails, the face of everything stiff, snobbish, and self-important at Bushwood. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Ted Knight was about 56. If he had lived to 2026, he would be 102, but in reality, he passed away in 1986 at age 62. After Caddyshack, Ted Knight did not disappear right away. He kept working with the sitcom Too Close for Comfort, a role that helped him hold a very solid place on television in the early 1980s. But when you look back at that stretch, you can feel this quiet layer of sadness running alongside the career. Ted Knight had been diagnosed with colon cancer back in 1977. By 1985, the illness had returned and spread further, while he was still trying to keep working. There is a contradiction here that feels very Ted Knight to me, both beautiful and painful at the same time. Early in 1985, he received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Less than 2 years later, he died from complications following surgery. Public glory came very close to the end of his life, and that makes it hard to remember Ted Knight as just laughter. Number 9. Peter Berkrot, Angie D'Annunzio. Peter Berkrot is the kind of face a lot of people notice right away when they watch Caddyshack, but once the movie is over, he is also one of the people who leaves a real impression. In the film, he plays Angie D'Annunzio, one of the young caddies who helps make this world feel less polished and a whole lot more alive. Caddyshack came out when Peter Berkrot was 21 years old. Now he is 67. What I find most interesting is that right from the start, he was not the kind of actor who landed in the movie purely by accident. Berkrot later said he got his audition through a connection from Tom Hulce, and then luck, along with the editing process, ended up making his part bigger than originally planned. That is a very Hollywood kind of beginning, just in a much quieter way than people might think. After Caddyshack, Peter Berkrot did not go down the movie star path that people usually assume is the measure of success. He kept working in theater, television, directing, writing, teaching, acting, and then gradually built a very steady career for himself in voiceover and audiobooks. Some actors step away from the center of the frame and slowly fade out. Peter Berkrot did not do that. He just changed the way he was present. Berkrot has narrated more than 450 audiobooks and more than 300 children's titles, while also winning a number of awards in the audiobook world, including Audiophile Earphones Awards and honors from the Society of Voice Arts and Sciences. Put simply, he did not disappear from the business. He just moved from being someone audiences remembered by face to someone they remembered by voice. Now Peter Berkrot is still working, still recording, still teaching acting, and still a very respected name in the audiobook world. I have always liked people like that. Not loud, not flashy, but able to go the distance, and still in love with the art no matter what form it takes. Number 10. Brian Doyle-Murray, Lou Loomis. Brian Doyle. Murray is the kind of guy you could easily glance past in Caddyshack and think of as just one more familiar supporting face. But the more you dig into it, the more you realize he is rooted in this movie more deeply than almost anybody else. In the film, he plays Lou Loomis, the man managing the caddies at Bushwood, always looking like he is way too tired of that whole bunch, but still has to keep everything moving. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Brian Doyle-Murray was about 34. In 2026, he is 80, and he will turn 81 at the end of October. What matters here is that when he made this movie, he was not just an actor. He already had a really strong comedy background from Second City and National Lampoon, and he was even nominated for an Emmy 3 years in a row for writing on Saturday Night Live. But what really makes Brian Doyle-Murray stand out goes all the way down to the roots of Caddyshack itself. This movie was directly inspired by his own memories of working as a caddy at Indian Hill Club in Illinois, and he was also one of the 3 people who co-wrote the script. In other words, Brian did not just step into Bushwood to play a role. He helped create that whole world from the very beginning. After Caddyshack, he did not become some loud A-list star, but he built an extremely durable career. Brian kept showing up in movie after movie with Bill Murray, like Scrooge Ghostbusters 2 and Groundhog Day, and he also left a mark in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, The Middle Sullivan, and Sun Lodge 49, and especially as the voice of the Flying Dutchman in SpongeBob SquarePants for many years. To the point that when the role got a new voice in the SpongeBob movie in 2025, people still brought up his name as a familiar part of that character's memory. Number 11. Dan Resin Drive. Beeper Dan Resin in Caddyshack is the kind of guy who only has to step on screen for a minute and you can instantly catch that Bushwood upper crust vibe. As Dr. Beeper, he did not need a ton of screen time, but he still pulled the audience's attention right to him. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Dan Resin was about 49, and the saddest part is that he passed away on July 31, 2010, at the age of 79 from complications of Parkinson's disease. Looking back at the years after Caddyshack, Dan Resin was not the kind of star who shot straight to the top, but he was the kind of face the American public always recognized somewhere. Outside of movies and television, he also became extremely well known as the Tie D Bowl Man in TV commercials, a commercial role that might sound small, but stayed in the public memory for years. The Los Angeles Times also pointed out that Resin already had a pretty strong stage background, before that, having studied music and theater at Indiana University, then pursued acting in New York, and appeared on Broadway. Later in life, his health declined because of Parkinson's, and he passed away in the summer of 2010. But honestly, when I think of Dan Resin, I do not go straight to a sad ending. I think of the kind of actor who only needs a few minutes on screen to make a whole world feel funnier. He really did become an outstanding artist. Number 12. Anne Ryerson. Grace. Anne Ryerson in Caddyshack is not the kind of performer who walks in and instantly steals the whole frame. She plays Grace, just a small link in the chain. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Anne Ryerson was about 30. This year, she is 77. She had already been working since the late 1970s, and looking back now, Caddyshack was just one stop on a much steadier career than people might assume. After this movie, Anne Ryerson did not go down the A-list star road, but that is actually what makes her interesting. She just kept quietly showing up in all kinds of projects, from Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives Troop, Beverly Hills, Minority Report, and Constantine, to a whole string of guest roles on television like ER, The West Wing, Mad Men, Grey's Anatomy, and even Good Trouble more recently. This kind of career does not feel explosive, but the more you look at it, the more impressive it gets. Hollywood always needs actors like that, people who do not have to become stars to keep getting called in to work for decades. And if there is one detail strong enough to anchor Anne Ryerson in the memory of mainstream audiences, it is her role as Nan Funkhauser on Curb Your Enthusiasm, where she appeared in 10 episodes. That is a really nice mark for the kind of familiar face who only gets better and more solid with age. Number 13. Henry Wilcoxon. The Bishop. Henry Wilcoxon walks into Caddyshack like he somehow wandered in from a completely different era of Hollywood. In the film, he plays the Bishop, a character who is dignified and solemn, and because he is so solemn, he ends up becoming a very funny part of Bushwood. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Henry Wilcoxon was about 74. He passed away in 1984 at the age of 78. After Caddyshack, Henry Wilcoxon's life was pretty much already near its final chapter. He was not really a man chasing new roles anymore. He felt more like an old icon making one more appearance, then quietly stepping off the stage. Henry Wilcoxon did not just appear in Caddyshack, he brought an entire era of filmmaking into the movie with him. And if Henry represents a very specific kind of old-school classic feel, then the next name takes this list in a much heavier, darker direction and leaves behind a totally different kind of echo. That is Albert Salmi. Number 14. Albert Salmi, Roy Nunan. Albert Salmi played Roy Nunan, Danny Nunan's father. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, he was about 53. Albert Salmi died in 1990 at the age of 63. And this was not some unknown supporting actor just showing up to fill space. He was a veteran character actor, had studied at the Actors Studio, and appeared in more than 150 films and television programs. Because he had that kind of deep professional foundation, Roy Nunan comes across as very solid. No showiness, no overdoing it, just a very real weight to him. After Caddyshack, Albert Salmi kept working exactly the kind of face Hollywood always needed when it wanted a character with weight and experience. But then his life came to an end in a way that was just too tragic. In April 1990, Salmi and his estranged wife Roberta were found dead at their home in Spokane. News reports at the time identified it as a murder-suicide. On screen, he always felt dependable. In real life, the story turned out darker than anybody would have wanted. And now, it is time for the final name on the list. Number 15. Lois Kibbee. Mrs. Smails. Lois Kibbee is a very fitting name to close out this list because she brings exactly the feeling Bushwood needs at the end: graceful, old-fashioned, a little distant, but still absolutely right for the country club world Caddyshack is always poking fun at. In the film, she plays Mrs. Smails, the wife who always keeps her calm next to Judge Smails. When Caddyshack came out in 1980, Lois Kibbee was about 58. She passed away in 1993 at the age of 71 from a brain tumor. Lois Kibbee was not the kind of actress who needed one big role to prove who she was. She already had a very deep career in television, theater, and radio, especially tied to The Edge of Night, and later Somerset and One Life to Live. Daytime television was really where her name stayed in the audience's memory the longest, with 5 Daytime Emmy nominations, including 4 acting nominations and 1 for writing. The Los Angeles Times also mentioned that Lois Kibbee had been part of more than 250 stage productions, a number that says a lot about how deeply she belonged to the craft in the fullest sense. Some people kept going a long way in the business. Some turned onto a different path. Some chose a quiet life outside the spotlight. And some are only still with us now through screen memories. But no matter where their lives took them afterward, I appreciate them all the same way, because those people helped create a piece of youth, a piece of laughter, and a piece of movie memory that a whole lot of viewers are still going to carry with them for a long time. And now, I want to hear from you. Out of everyone on this list, who do you love most, and whose face comes back to you first whenever Caddyshack gets mentioned? Share it in the comments. And if you want to keep going with me and revisit the casts of other classic movies, leave your suggestions, then subscribe to the channel so this series can keep going. But there is something interesting about the shows that live the longest in our memories. The more familiar they feel, the easier it is to think we already know everything about them. But behind it, there is an entire layer of backstage stories that many viewers have never heard. So today, we are heading back to Hazard County and uncovering the most fascinating secrets behind the Dukes of Hazzard. And trust me, a few of them may make you see this series in a completely different way.